I'm Riley Whitman, 32 years old, born and raised in the small seaside town of Fairhaven, Maine, where every house has a white porch and the American flag flies year-round. My father, Charles Whitman, was a living legend in the northeastern commercial real estate world. But to me, he was the wall that never fell, until the day he personally pushed me out of his life. We used to be a team. When my mother passed away from a stroke when I was 12, I became the only person my father could truly trust. From early mornings clearing the yard to late nights reviewing lease contracts, he had only me. No one expected Charles Whitman's only daughter to understand engineering schematics and Whitman Properties balance sheets like the back of her hand, but I lived for it until she walked into his life. Maryanne, she wasn't the evil stepmother from fairy tales. She was smarter, softer, always knowing how to make herself seem harmless, but behind the scenes, she slowly pushed me aside. And my father, the man who once said, "No one understands me like you do," began letting her voice grow louder in every major decision. When I was 26, we had a brutal argument over a redevelopment project along the Port Casco riverfront. I wanted to build a mixed-use community with affordable housing, public gathering spaces, playgrounds, and native plant landscaping. My father preferred glass towers, luxury restaurants, and upscale spas, all shaped by Maryanne's extensive experience. I pushed back. He called me naive. I called him a traitor to his own values. The argument lasted 3 hours. In the end, he looked me in the eye and said, "If you can't adapt to reality, then there's no place for you here." I stood frozen in the middle of the office as he turned away, no glance back, not a second of hesitation. I slammed the folder shut and walked out, with just one suitcase and my master's degree in urban development from Columbia. I landed in San Diego with $900 in my account and a call from an old friend who was starting a consultancy focused on sustainable residential planning. "If you really believe in what you sketched in that proposal," she said, "come here. We need someone like you." For the next 5 years, I never looked back. No calls, no texts, no Thanksgivings, no Christmases. Whenever an unknown Maine number popped up, I hit decline, and he never called again. I heard that my father continued to run the company, still attended big events, hand in hand with Maryanne, flanked by her 2 children, Connor and Bethany, like the rightful heirs. I wasn't at the grand opening of the shopping center I helped envision. I didn't attend the 40th anniversary celebration of the company. They didn't invite me, and I didn't need an invitation. But everything changed on a November morning as I sat in a conference room during a project pitch in Santa Clara. My phone lit up with a name I never thought I'd see again, Rachel Monroe, my high school best friend, who still lived less than 2 miles from my old home. Her voice cracked through the speaker. "Really? I'm sorry, but I thought you should know your dad passed away last night." I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt something snap, like the last thread connecting me to what once was family had finally torn loose. I stared out the window. The California sky was still blindingly blue, but inside me, something had gone completely dark. I booked a flight back to Maine the very next morning. The plane landed in Portland under a steady drizzle. The biting cold air hit my lungs and made me shiver, as if the place itself wasn't ready to welcome me home. I rented a small car and drove straight to Fairhaven, where the roads remained as quiet as they had been 5 years ago, but the house I once called home felt completely unfamiliar. The Whitman estate now wore a different skin. Automated iron gates, LED motion sensor lights, and a tall white stone wall that had never existed in any of my memories. I parked outside but didn't get out right away. The lights were still on, and Maryanne's SUV sat neatly next to 2 luxury cars I'd never seen before. I pulled out my phone and called Rachel. "You're sure the funeral's tomorrow, right?" "Yeah, 10 o'clock sharp at St. Jude Chapel." She hesitated. "But, Riley, I have to tell you, I just heard from my mom. Maryanne said you're not invited." I froze. "Not invited? What do you mean?" She said it's for close family only, that you aren't part of the family anymore. A long, suffocating silence followed. My heart pounded like someone had punched me straight in the chest. I hung up without another word. The next morning, I still showed up at the church. I wore a simple black coat, leather boots, and tied my hair up. I didn't need anyone to hand me a next of kin badge to justify standing before the man who once taught me how to read zoning maps before I even knew long division. But just as I stepped onto the stone stairs, a man in a black suit blocked my path. "Miss Whitman?" "Yes?" "I've been instructed by the family, specifically Mrs. Maryanne Whitman, that you're not allowed inside." I looked him square in the eye, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "He was my father. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to say goodbye." He looked away. "I'm very sorry, but if you enter, we'll have to ask you to leave." I stood there, gripping my fists until my knuckles turned white. Inside, the hymn music echoed. I could hear Bethany, Maryanne's daughter, giving a eulogy. She never spent a single real day with my father the way I had, and yet here she was, the face of family. I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. At 3 that afternoon, I stopped in front of the Whitman Properties office. The new sign gleamed under the rain. I didn't expect a welcome, but I needed to know what was going on. The receptionist was a young woman I'd never seen. When I gave her my name, her eyes flashed confusion and a hint of panic. I think there's a mistake. You're not listed for today's inheritance meeting." My brows furrowed. "Inheritance meeting?" "Yes, with the family attorney. The will's being read at 4, but I was told only current family is allowed." I let out a dry laugh. "I'm Charles Whitman's biological daughter. Flesh and blood. You're telling me I'm not family?" She looked helpless and said nothing. I left my business card and requested an urgent meeting with the estate attorney. That night, I sat in a small rented motel room downtown. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Only one question echoed in my mind. Why would Dad let everything fall into Maryanne's hands? I opened my laptop and logged into the old company network. Though I'd resigned years ago, I still had limited access to some internal records from my past projects. Strangely, my old email still had asset database access, maybe because Dad had never removed my credentials. And there it was, a private shared folder labeled RW Personal Transfer. I clicked. Dozens of PDF files appeared. Scanned property transfers, power of attorney forms, regional development maps. Signed 14 months ago by Charles Whitman, transferring to Riley Whitman. I stared at the screen, heart pounding in my ears. My father had already transferred major assets to me, and none of them knew, not Maryanne, not Bethany, not Connor. I looked up at the framed photo of Dad I'd brought, taken at 60, grinning beneath a yellow field of mustard blooms. I whispered, "You knew, didn't you, Dad?" I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I never thought I'd dial again. My father's former private attorney, Mr. Eugene Callahan. I hit call. "Hello? It's Riley Whitman. We need to meet as soon as possible." His voice dropped low. "I've been expecting this call." The meeting took place the next morning at Eugene Callahan's office, a 3-story red brick building next to Fairhaven's town hall. The office was small, discreet, but carried the kind of authority that mirrored the man I was about to see. Eugene had been my father's trusted attorney for over 2 decades. I remembered him well, sharp eyes and a voice deep as old oak. He never wasted time on anything unimportant. He stood to greet me as I walked in. "Right, Mr. Callahan." We sat at the meeting table, which had already been prepared. On it sat a glossy black wooden box, a sealed envelope, and a thick file. Eugene folded his hands and looked at me over his rimless glasses. "Your father began his asset transfer planning 3 years ago. He didn't want anyone in the household to know, not even me, until after he passed." I looked at the box. "Why?" He said clearly, if Maryanne finds out, she'll sabotage everything. And he wasn't wrong. He pushed the box toward me. Seaside is the key to a safe deposit box at Harbor Trust Bank. You're the only one authorized to access it. I opened the lid. A small set of keys rested on deep navy velvet, along with a handwritten note. Box 415, basement level, ID required. I picked them up, heart pounding. Eugene handed me the file. These are copies of the assets your father transferred to your name. 3 commercial lots on Bayside, 2 rental complexes in North Fairhaven, and most importantly, full development rights for the Seabrook project. I nearly dropped the file. Seabrook? They're preparing to sell it to Evershore Group. They can't sell what they don't legally own. I looked at him, stunned. Why would he do this? He once told me I didn't have what it took to handle large-scale projects. He said that when he was being manipulated. Eugene's voice grew more somber. Charles wasn't foolish. He saw Maryanne slowly consolidating power by installing her 2 children on the board. He knew Tyler lacked the skills, and Bethany only cared about appearances. But he hoped she'd stop. When he realized he was running out of time, he acted. I gripped the keys tighter. My eyes landed on the sealed envelope. What's this? A video recording. He made it 6 months ago. You should watch it alone. I left the office without another word. I didn't want to go back to the motel. I wanted to be somewhere that once felt like home. The Whitman estate was quiet. I parked a few houses down, then crossed the back porch to the garden shed. I still had a personal key. Luckily, Maryanne had never changed the lock. Inside, it still smelled of wood dust, old paint, and motor oil. I turned on the desk lamp, placed my laptop on the old folding table, and plugged in the USB drive. The screen lit up. My father's face appeared, thinner, grayer, but his eyes unchanged. If you're watching this, I'm likely no longer with you. And if that's the case, then I need you to listen closely. I sat up straight. My lips trembled slightly. I wasn't perfect. I pushed you away when I should have pulled you closer. But I never stopped watching, Riley. I saw you turn Sequoia Green into a model project in California. I read every article, watched every one of your talks, and I was proud. More than I ever was standing at a podium myself. He paused. Maryanne doesn't know this, but over the past 3 years, I've been moving what matters most out of her reach. I believe you can carry on, not by being me, but by doing what you believe is right. You have vision, something I lost a long time ago. My throat tightened. The box at Harbor Trust contains original documents and our joint plan for Seabrook. The sustainable housing project, not a string of luxury restaurants. I know you'll do the right thing. And if anyone tries to stop you, remember, the truth is on your side. The video ended in silence. I sat there in the soft yellow glow of the lamp, chest swelling with an emotion I couldn't name. After all the distance, he hadn't forgotten me. Not just a share of the estate, but a legacy of trust. I opened the Fairhaven map and marked Seabrook. Maryanne's power game was about to be exposed. And this time, I had proof. The will reading took place on Tuesday afternoon at the family's new law office, a walnut-paneled room on the 2nd floor of an old building near Fairhaven's Central Square. I arrived 10 minutes early, sitting in my car, staring up at the window where golden chandelier light shone through silk curtains, wondering if my father had ever stood there, looking down at the town the way I was now. When I stepped in, the receptionist looked at me as if she'd seen a ghost. Of course, my name wasn't on the list. But I simply smiled, handed over a sealed envelope with my father's original signature, and said, "Please give this to Mr. Harry Sutherland, right away." 10 minutes later, he came down himself. Harry had replaced Eugene after my father started pulling out of the Callahan office 3 years ago. Tall, balding, eyes like magnifying lenses. Not friendly, but thoroughly professional. "Means Whitman, please come upstairs. We've just begun." The meeting room was spacious, with a long wooden table that seated 10. Maryanne sat at the head wearing a high-collared black dress, her gaze freezing the moment she saw me. Connor, 28, never lasted a full week at work, sat on the left side, fiddling with his phone. Bethany, always graceful, always proper, glanced at me once, then turned away. like I didn't exist. I pulled out a chair on the opposite side, calmly opening the file folder in front of me. Harry cleared his throat, slicing through the tension like a string drawn too tight. If I may, at the request of Mr. Charles Whitman, I will now read the contents of his final will and testament, prepared 8 months ago and legally certified by the State Notary Office. Maryanne laced her fingers, trying to mask her satisfaction. Harry began reading, his voice flat and steady like a tape recorder. I, Charles Benjamin Whitman, being of sound mind and acting of my own free will, hereby leave the residence at number 19 Shoreline Drive, along with all household contents, to my wife, Mrs. Maryanne Whitman. She nodded slightly, unsurprised. The sum of $3 million from my personal reserve fund to my stepchildren, Connor Mitchell and Bethany Mitchell. Connor raised his eyebrows in approval. Bethany remained as still as a statue. And all remaining shares in Whitman properties, including but not limited to managerial rights, voting power, and profit distributions, shall be transferred to. Harry paused, looking directly at me. Riley Whitman. The room sank into dead silence. Then the sound broke, like glass shattering on tile. What? Maryanne sprang up, nearly tipping her chair. He changed the will. I was there when he signed the old one. Harry looked up, still composed. Yes, and then he submitted a new version directly to the state notary's office on April 12th. There is video confirmation, and by law, the latest version is legally binding. Bethany turned her head toward me, lips pressed tight. Connor let out a short laugh. It was unclear if it was disbelief or irritation. Maryanne's voice dropped, but it was sharp as a needle. She walked away. She abandoned this family. She doesn't deserve this. I didn't respond. Instead, I slid a thick file to the center of the table. Harry glanced over it, then nodded. These are copies of the asset transfers, Seabrook, Bayside South, and 2 residential blocks on Franklin Street, executed legally over the past 2 years. Title holder, Riley Whitman. Each transaction was notarized independently and recorded with the Cumberland County Land Office. Connor shot up from his seat. This is fraud. She arranged all of this while he was sick and not thinking straight. I calmly reached into my bag and pulled out a USB drive. If that's true, you might want to watch this video. It was recorded 6 months ago in my father's office, in front of Mr. Eugene Callahan. Harry plugged in the USB. The screen displayed my father, thinner, his hair more silver, but his eyes still clear, speaking each word with intention. I, Charles Whitman, fully sound in mind and acting of my own free will, hereby transfer the following assets to my biological daughter, Riley Whitman. No one said another word. I stood, gathered my documents, and spoke in a low but firm voice. I didn't come here to demand anything. I'm simply receiving what my father believed I was worthy of keeping. Maryanne looked at me like she wanted to tear me apart, but she couldn't do a thing. Couldn't deny it, couldn't erase it. Everything was already crystal clear. I officially took over Whitman Properties on Thursday morning, 3 days after the will reading. The office still carried Maryanne's traces, expensive oil paintings, the lingering scent of luxury perfume on the doorknob of the executive suite. But the first thing I did wasn't to change the desk or replace the nameplate. I asked Margaret, my father's longtime secretary, to bring all pending project files to my desk. Margaret, in her 60s, with silver hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, was the only person in the office who looked at me without caution. Skeleep. Mr. Charles once told me, if you ever returned, to give you everything on Seabrook. I've kept my word. I nodded in thanks but said nothing else. It took exactly 15 minutes to realize something was wrong. A draft agreement, sloppily typed, no official header, was tucked behind the Seabrook file. Buyer, Halston and Crane Development, a company I had never heard of, but the signature below was all too familiar. Bethany Mitchell. Title, Vice President of Strategic Restructuring. Date signed just 2 weeks before my father passed away. I kept going. Another appendix, transfer of 3 properties in the Newfields Industrial District. a long-term lease at a ridiculously low rate to an entity called FWD Capital LLC. Representative, Raymond Garrison. I nearly dropped the file. Raymond Garrison was none other than the man behind Garrison Land Works, my father's biggest rival for over 30 years. A man my father had banned from being involved in any project tied to Whitman Capital. I called Margaret in, my voice low but sharp. Who authorized Bethany to sign these contracts? She looked confused. I, I, I don't know. After Mr. Charles was hospitalized, Mrs. Maryanne started delegating temporary authority to Bethany. Everyone assumed he approved. I clenched my jaw, a weight crashing down the back of my neck. That very evening, I met with Eugene Callahan. Under the warm light in his worn-out office, he opened his computer and pulled up an encrypted folder. Charles didn't trust Maryanne, so he asked me to monitor a separate data account, one that tracked any suspicious transaction activity during his last 6 months. Riley, you'll want to see this. I stared at the screen, an audio clip from an internal meeting between Bethany and a deep male voice. Bethany, my mother signed the draft, don't worry. Riley's not coming back. Even if she shows up, there won't be enough proof to stop these contracts. Male voice, I need to be sure. Lawrence isn't willing to wait. My heart skipped a beat. Lawrence. Lawrence Garrison, Raymond's son, the heir to Garrison Land Works, and the same man who once called my project in California a justice theater funded by pity capital. I stood up. I need copies of all this, tonight. Eugene nodded. Relief. If you want to flip this board, you'll need to move fast. They won't just sit back. And they didn't. Less than 24 hours later, I received a letter from Halston and Crane's legal team asking me to confirm the validity of the Seabrook sale contract, executed by the previous acting VP prior to the change in legal authority. I called an emergency meeting at company headquarters, Margaret, the legal team, the 3 core department heads, all present. I stood in front of the room, projecting the Seabrook development map on the screen, along with the suspicious documents. They think I wouldn't know, but I know every inch of this land, every cornerstone my father laid, and I will not allow anyone to liquidate what belongs to my family for a few dirty contracts. No one spoke, but I saw their eyes shift, from wary to ready. I ended the meeting with one clear sentence. We're launching a full internal audit. Every contract in the past 6 months will be reviewed. Anyone involved will answer to the law. When I returned to my office, my phone screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. You came back quicker than I thought, but don't think this is a game you can win. LL. I set the phone down. No trembling, no fear. Only one thought remained in my mind. This was no longer about inheritance. This was a war for honor. 3 days after the emergency meeting, I still hadn't left the office before 8 p.m. Piles of files, red-marked contracts, and Eugene's data folder made me feel like I was tracing every single brick of the maze my father had left behind. But what troubled me most weren't the transactions. It was the gaps. Several key assets had been temporarily held by shell companies. Some contracts lacked my father's original signature but bore forged seals. More concerning, a few names kept popping up in the transfer paperwork. Bethany Mitchell and a low-level legal assistant who once worked for Garrison Land Works. That evening, just as I was reviewing the Oakline Street project file, a soft knock came at the door. I looked up. It was Bethany. Her eyes were puffy, makeup-free, wrapped in a wrinkled gray cardigan, nothing like the polished, confident woman from the executive meetings. I only have a few minutes, she said quietly. May I come in? I nodded, not lifting my hand from the red marker. She sat down across from me, silent for a long while before she finally spoke. My mother lied about a lot, but I didn't realize how much until I read what Mr. Charles wrote. I looked her in the eyes. What did you find? Bethany pulled an old, leather-bound notebook from her coat pocket, the corners worn down. She placed it on the table and slid it toward me. It was shoved inside the drawer of an old bookshelf in the attic. I used to think he only kept business notes, but it's not. I flipped through the pages. My father's handwriting, bold and slightly slanted, detailed notes not about finances, but about his thoughts. Riley might stay mad at me forever, but she's the only one who sees Fairhaven as a community, not a pie to slice up. Maryanne doesn't understand or doesn't want to. That development doesn't mean erasing roots. I should have protected her instead of staying silent when she was pushed out. I was so afraid of losing a new family, I lost the only child who actually understood me. I closed the notebook, fingers tightening around it. Bethany lowered her head, her voice cracking. He called you the only one who understood me, and I just followed my mother like a machine. I'm not saying this to excuse myself, Riley, but I don't want to be part of Lawrence's game anymore. I leaned back in my chair. She looked like she might cry. The hardened part of me wanted to shut the door in her face, but the part my father trusted told me to listen. Bethany, do you know your mother is using your name to sign off on things? Have you even looked at the Oakline transfer contract? She froze. No, she told me it was internal paperwork. I never looked closely, but if you need, I am willing to testify, even before the legal board. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Are you sure? If you break ranks, Maryanne won't forgive you, and Lawrence, he won't just let it go. Bethany scoffed, a bitter smile the first time she dropped the facade of elegance. I've spent 10 years in a gilded cage where every decision had to be mother approved. I'm done. I want to choose for myself, even just once. She stood, retrieving the journal. A reporter on the New York Post read the story QAnon and reported scandal and spookiness. People have begun to sketch outs. I'll scan the pages related to Seabrook and the restructuring project. It might help you prove Charles left. I watched her walk out, feeling like someone had cracked open a door long rusted shut. Not full trust, but a foothold. One I desperately needed in a battle that more and more, I realized, wasn't just about land or inheritance. It was about truth. An hour later, I received an email. Attached was a scanned copy of 3 handwritten pages from my father with a note. Fairhaven doesn't need another glass tower. It needs space for those who never had a chance. I closed the laptop. The community meeting was held on Monday evening at the Fairhaven Town Hall, a red brick building next to the old post office, where I once played my first concert back in 8th grade, and where my father once stood before hundreds to announce the coastal redevelopment project in 1999. Now I stood on that same stage, facing the eyes of neighbors, shop owners, teachers, and builders. The people who truly live and breathe this land, not those who count every inch of it to convert into commercial value like Lawrence Garrison. He sat in the front row, on the right, gray suit, arms folded, his face expressionless, but his eyes never stopped scanning. I stepped up, set the thick stack of documents on the wooden podium, and began with a sentence that wasn't in my prepared remarks. When I was a kid, I used to collect seashells on Seabrook Beach with my dad. One time he asked me, "Do you know how much this land is worth?" I shook my head, and he said, "It's worth nothing if we don't leave room for those who have nothing." The room went silent. I continued. I'm here today not as the heir to Whitman Properties. I'm here because I believe Fairhaven deserves a future that isn't just for those with deep pockets. I transitioned to presenting the new plan, Seabrook Community Green. No more glass skyscrapers like in Lawrence's renderings. Instead, the plan included mixed-income housing, open playgrounds, a community garden, a vocational training center for local youth, and a row of small restaurants with affordable lease options for local businesses during their first year. A hand went up. It was Mrs. Fay, 70 years old, owner of a bakery that had been in business for 30 years. She stood, voice clear. "You said you'd keep rental rates low for locals. Is there any legal guarantee or just a promise?" I nodded and pulled up the final slide. "I've signed an agreement with the Maine Sustainable Development Commission. The contract stipulates that at least 40% of the commercial space must be reserved for local businesses, with fixed rent for the first 3 years. The murmurs turned into nods of approval. A man stood up. And the housing? Who gets priority? Families who currently live and work in Fairhaven will be prioritized using a point system based on length of residency and income level. We're also partnering with the state's nonprofit housing organization to ensure fairness. Lawrence jumped out. My project would bring in 3 times the tax revenue for this town. Miss Riley is selling a fantasy. No one builds a community without profit. I turned and looked him square in the eye. You're wrong. My father used to say, real profit comes from the trust people place in your land. And I believe he was right. You had your chance to speak. Now let the town decide. Applause erupted from people I never thought would take my side. Some still looked unsure, but it was clear. The balance was shifting. By the time the meeting ended, Lawrence had disappeared before I could say a word. But I didn't need to. The message that came the next morning said it all. Transaction with the Seabrook Land Board officially suspended. Request to reevaluate development based on proposal by Riley Whitman. I set my phone down on the table and exhaled for the first time in weeks. Bethany walked in with 2 cups of hot coffee. Did you win? I shook my head, smiling faintly. I didn't win. Fairhaven did. She sat down across from me, pulling a contract out of her purse. One more thing. This is the cancellation agreement for the Oakline Street transfer. I signed it. Garrison Landworks no longer has any hold. I looked at her, the one once considered my perfect replacement in Maryanne's eyes, and saw, instead, a true ally. Not because of shared blood, but because she chose to stand on the right side. That April, Maryanne Whitman quietly left Fairhaven. No farewell party, no press conference, not even a letter for the community she once treated as her personal domain. According to her lawyer, Maryanne had sold the Shoreline Avenue estate to an international brokerage firm and relocated to Palm Beach, Florida. The reason given was so empty it echoed, in need of rest. No one at the company asked about her after she left. Even those once closest to Maryanne gradually distanced themselves, leaving Whitman Properties like a ship adrift. Until I stepped into the boardroom for the first time as official CEO. I didn't say much, just 3 sentences. I won't be letting anyone go during the first week, but starting the second, every decision will be based on transparency and contribution. Then came 8 weeks of nearly nonstop work. Margaret and I conducted a full financial audit, eliminating questionable contracts, ending deals with investors only chasing short-term profits. A new division was established, the Department of Community and Sustainable Development, with Bethany as its first executive director. Some said I was taking a risk. They weren't wrong. But I believed a company couldn't survive without the trust of those who live among the projects it builds. On my mother's 62nd birthday, I hosted the launch ceremony of the Elaine Whitman Foundation, named after her, the woman who taught me how to listen before acting, how to walk gently among those who raise their voices. The foundation would provide college scholarships to high school girls in Cumberland County, pursuing studies in architecture, planning, or urban development. The event was held at the Fairhaven Public Library. Not fancy, not elaborate, but every pair of eyes in that room was real, just like the whispers I overheard after my speech. Elaine's daughter really did inherit both her heart and her head. That was enough to let me know I was on the right path. I moved out of the hotel right after the launch into a small 2-story cedar house, a 10-minute walk from town center. Not big, but it had a backyard where I could grow lavender like my mother loved, a porch where I could work in the afternoons, and a long wooden bench just big enough for 2. Hella, the best friend who once dragged me to San Diego, visited on the day I had just hung a photo of my mom on the wall. She looked around the house and joked, "I thought you'd be living in the Whitman estate." I laughed. I've had enough bricks thrown at me there. I need a place to call home, not a second boardroom. Ella looked at me for a long time before asking, "You're really staying in this town?" I nodded without hesitation. Fairhaven has changed, and so have I. On a June morning, while I was reviewing applications for the first scholarship cycle, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Hello? Man's voice, soft and slow. Riley, it's me, Connor. I didn't speak for 2 seconds. I know I don't deserve to call. I just wanted to say, I've signed the agreement to withdraw from all claims, and I'm in recovery. Haven't touched a drink in 3 months. I leaned back in my chair. Good for you. There was a pause, then he added, I know I'm the ugliest part of my mother's legacy, but you're nothing like her, and I think my father was right to trust you. I didn't respond right away, but when I hung up, I felt something I thought I'd lost for years. Forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself, for carrying that anger too long. That night, I sat on the porch bench, holding a cup of herbal tea next to someone I never expected to re-enter my life. Caleb Dawson, an old friend from high school, once a structural engineer in Denver, now back in Fairhaven caring for his father with heart disease. I told him about phase 2 of the Seabrook project, this time including a cooperative housing model for young families. Caleb listened intently, eyes lighting up. If you need someone to map the soil structures, I'm in. I laughed. Still remember how? He nodded, leaning a little closer. And I remember you, Riley. I looked into his eyes, not turning away this time. Then stay, for real. Fairhaven was never perfect, but it was home. And I had finally come back to where I truly belonged, not as the daughter of Charles Whitman, but simply as myself. Riley, the one who rewrote the legacy in her own way. Riley's story is proof that not everyone born into power is automatically accepted, but with integrity and perseverance, you can reclaim the place you deserve. In real life, some are excluded from legacy not because they failed, but because they refused to conform. Yet, as Riley showed, when you stand up for what's right, you don't just protect a legacy, you redefine it in a way that benefits an entire community. What do you think of Riley's choices and how she faced her family? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful family stories and life-changing lessons.